3 weeks. That's how long it took Jake Morrison to watch $15,000 disappear from his account. Money he'd saved for 2 years. Money that was supposed to keep him safe when life got unpredictable. But here's the twist that makes this story worth your time. Jake didn't lose that money to bad luck or some crypto scam. He lost it because he thought he was being smart. He'd quit his job, convinced he was about to become the next success story plastered across social media. The kind of guy who posts screenshots of massive gains and inspires others to follow. Instead, Jake learned the hardest lesson the market can teach. And if you've ever felt tempted to risk everything on what seems like a sure thing, his story might save you from making the same mistake. Jake Morrison wasn't supposed to be the guy who loses everything. At 28, he had the kind of steady life that most people his age were still chasing. Marketing coordinator at a mid-sized tech company in Denver, decent salary, good benefits, the kind of job that lets you sleep well at night knowing your bills are covered. Every morning started the same way. Coffee first, always black. Then a quick check of his investment app while the city woke up around him. Jake had been building his portfolio for 2 years, nothing fancy, just index funds and a few individual stocks he'd researched. Small gains, but consistent. The kind of progress that compounds over time. His apartment reflected this measured approach, and clean lines, minimal furniture, everything in its place. The only hint of his growing obsession sat on his kitchen counter. A stack of finance books, pages marked with sticky notes, margins filled with his careful handwriting. Jake's co-workers knew him as the quiet one who ate lunch at his desk, always reading something on his phone. What they didn't know was that he was studying. Every lunch break, every commute, every spare moment was spent learning about markets, analyzing trends, absorbing everything he could about building wealth. The balance alerts from his savings account had become his favorite notifications. Each deposit, each milestone reached, felt like proof that his plan was working. He wasn't making huge moves or taking crazy risks. He was being smart, patient, strategic. But patience has a way of wearing thin when you start seeing other people's success stories everywhere you look, when every social media feed shows someone younger, someone who started with less, someone who took the leap and made it big. Jake would tell himself he was different, more careful, more prepared. He had his emergency fund, his research skills, his steady income. If anyone could make the transition from employee to full-time investor, it would be someone like him. The morning routine remained the same, but something had shifted. The careful notes in his finance books had become calculations of potential. The modest gains in his portfolio had become stepping stones to something bigger. And the quiet confidence he'd built over 2 years was about to be tested in ways he never imagined. The thing about routine is how invisible it becomes until it's gone. Jake's days moved like clockwork, alarm at 6:30, gym by 7, desk by 9. His cubicle sat in the middle of the marketing floor, surrounded by the familiar hum of keyboards and coffee makers, the occasional burst of laughter from someone's desk. He was good at his job. Not brilliant, not revolutionary, but solid. The kind of employee who submitted reports on time, never missed deadlines, and kept his head down during office politics. His manager trusted him with important clients. His co-workers respected him. It was the kind of steady career that his parents had always hoped he'd find. But somewhere between the morning emails and afternoon meetings, Jake's mind would drift. While his colleagues discussed weekend plans or office gossip, he'd be calculating compound interest in his head. During lunch breaks, he'd walk to the nearby park, earbuds in, listening to finance podcasts instead of music. The automatic payments from his checking account to his investment accounts had become his favorite part of each month. Watching those transfers happen felt like watching his future take shape, dollar by dollar. His emergency fund sat comfortably in a high-yield savings account, growing slowly but surely. It was money he never touched, never even thought about spending. Evenings were when Jake's real education happened. His apartment would fill with the glow of multiple screens, laptop open to financial news sites, phone scrolling through investment forums, tablet displaying charts and graphs. He'd learned to read market patterns, understand earnings reports, spot trends before they became obvious. The books on his counter weren't just decoration anymore. They were tools. The intelligent investor sat next to a random walk down Wall Street, both marked with dozens of sticky notes. He'd quiz himself on concepts while cooking dinner, practice valuation models while watching TV. His friends started noticing the change. Weekend plans became negotiations around market hours. Conversations at bars would somehow circle back to stock picks and economic indicators. They'd tease him about becoming a finance bro, but Jake didn't mind. He was building something they couldn't see yet. The social media feeds were where the real temptation lived. Instagram stories of expensive cars with captions about passive income. LinkedIn posts from 25-year-olds talking about their 7-figure portfolios. YouTube videos promising to reveal the secret that Wall Street doesn't want regular people to know. Jake told himself he was too smart to fall for the obvious scams, but he couldn't help but wonder what he was missing. His careful, methodical approach was working, but slowly. So slowly that sometimes it felt like he was standing still while everyone else was racing ahead. The work presentations became harder to focus on. The quarterly reports and campaign metrics felt increasingly meaningless when he could be researching the next big opportunity. His boss would ask questions, and Jake would snap back to attention, give the right answers, maintain the facade of engagement. But the facade was starting to crack. Not in obvious ways. His performance reviews were still good. His relationships with colleagues remained professional and friendly. The crack was internal, invisible to everyone but him. It was the growing feeling that he was playing it too safe, that security was just another word for settling. Late at night, when the apartment was quiet and the city had settled into its rhythm, Jake would lie in bed scrolling through success stories. Regular people who'd taken calculated risks and won big. People who trusted their research, made bold moves, and changed their lives forever. The steady job, the automatic payments, the careful planning, it all felt suddenly small. Not wrong exactly, but incomplete. Like he was preparing for a game he'd never actually play. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. Jake was scrolling through Reddit during his coffee break, half listening to his manager discuss quarterly projections, when he saw it. The post that would unravel 2 years of careful planning in less than 3 weeks. The headline was electric. This AI stock is about to explode. Insider DD, get in before institutions catch on. The user claimed to work at a major tech company, said he'd seen the contracts, the partnerships, the revenue projections that weren't public yet. The comment section was on fire. Screenshot after screenshot of massive portfolio gains. People claiming they'd already doubled their money overnight. Jake's hands trembled as he read deeper. This wasn't some meme stock or crypto scheme. This was legitimate artificial intelligence technology, the kind that would reshape entire industries, the kind of opportunity that comes once in a generation. The emergency fund balance flashed in his mind. $15,000 sitting idle in a savings account, earning pennies while this stock was about to rocket. His co-workers' voices faded into background noise as Jake calculated potential returns. If he put everything in now, before the mainstream caught on, he could turn $15,000 into $60,000. Maybe more. By lunch, he'd made the decision that would change everything. Not just to invest, but to quit. If this opportunity was as real as it seemed, why waste time in meetings about marketing campaigns when he could be building real wealth? Why settle for a steady paycheck when financial freedom was within reach? The resignation email was sent before he could second-guess himself. His manager's shocked response, his co-workers' confused questions, none of it mattered. Jake Morrison was about to become exactly what he'd been studying to become. A full-time investor who'd spotted the opportunity everyone else had missed. The stock purchase went through at 2:47 p.m. $15,000, his entire safety net. gone in a single decline transaction from his emergency fund, transferred into what he believed was his future. The silence in Jake's apartment felt different now. 3 days had passed since the stock hit its lowest point, and the reality was settling in like dust after an explosion. His portfolio showed numbers that seemed impossible, a loss so severe it felt like looking at someone else's account. He sat on his couch, laptop closed, phone face down on the coffee table. The finance books that had once inspired him now felt like artifacts from a different life. A life where steady growth and careful planning made sense. A life where $15,000 represented security instead of a lesson he'd never forget. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the clarity that came after the shock wore off. Jake could see it all now, how the Reddit post had been crafted to trigger exactly the kind of emotional response that overrides rational thinking. How the screenshots could have been fabricated. How the urgency was manufactured to prevent the kind of research he'd always prided himself on doing. His phone buzzed with a notification from his budget tracker app, reminding him of bills that were coming due. Rent in 2 weeks. Car payment next month. The automatic payments he'd relied on were now impossible without his salary, without his safety net. But something else was becoming clear in the quiet of his apartment. This wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of a different kind of education. The kind that comes from rebuilding rather than building. The kind that teaches you the difference between confidence and wisdom. Jake picked up his phone and opened a note-taking app. At the top, he wrote, "What I learned." It was time to start over, but this time with knowledge that couldn't be found in any book. The decision came to Jake on a Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after he'd lost everything. He was staring at his remaining $3,000, what was left after the crash, when something shifted. Instead of seeing it as a failure, he started seeing it as a foundation. The old Jake would have been paralyzed by analysis, reading dozens of books before making any move. But this Jake had learned something that no book could teach. Sometimes the most valuable education comes from your own mistakes, not other people's theories. He opened a spreadsheet and started rebuilding from scratch. Not his portfolio, his entire approach to money. The emergency fund that had vanished in a single transaction would be replaced, but this time it would be untouchable. Sacred. The first rule of his new financial system. Never again would desperation make his decisions. Jake found work within 2 weeks. Freelance marketing projects that paid the bills while he rebuilt. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work that reminded him why he'd been good at his corporate job in the first place. He scheduled every payment and tracked every expense using a simple budgeting app, treating each dollar like it mattered because now he knew how quickly they could disappear. The real transformation wasn't in the numbers, though. It was in how Jake approached opportunity itself. When friends shared investment tips or social media promised quick returns, he felt something different now. Not fear, caution. The kind of healthy skepticism that comes from understanding the difference between research and wishful thinking. His new portfolio started small. $25 a week into broad market index funds. Nothing exciting. Nothing that would make for dramatic social media posts. But every week, without fail, those automatic transfers reminded him of something important. Wealth isn't built in moments of genius. It's built through consistency, patience, and the wisdom to know when not to act. The $3,000 became 4, then 5. Slowly, deliberately, without drama or desperate gambles. 6 months later, Jake's phone buzzed with a familiar notification. His budgeting app showed something he hadn't seen since before the crash. Positive cash flow for 3 months running. The emergency fund he'd started rebuilding had reached $2,000. Not the 15 he'd lost, but enough to let him sleep without checking his account balance at midnight. The freelance work had evolved into something more stable. 2 regular clients, predictable income, and the kind of routine that felt sustainable rather than desperate. Jake had even received an offer to return to corporate marketing, but he'd turned it down. not out of arrogance this time, but from genuine preference for the flexibility he'd built. His investment portfolio looked completely different now. No individual stocks, no hot tips from social media, no attempts to time the market. Just steady contributions to diversified index funds, the kind of boring strategy that compound interest rewards over decades. The weekly transfers had become automatic, invisible, the way wealth building should be. What struck Jake most wasn't the money itself, but how differently he felt about it. The anxiety that used to come with every market dip had been replaced by something he'd never experienced before: genuine confidence. Not the overconfidence that had led to his downfall, but the quiet assurance that comes from having a plan that can survive both good times and bad. The Reddit forums he'd once haunted for investment advice were replaced by financial education podcasts that preached patience over quick gains. Jake had learned to recognize the difference between information and marketing, between opportunity and manipulation. Jake Morrison's story isn't really about the $15,000 he lost, or even the steady balance he's rebuilt since then. It's about the space between confidence and wisdom, and how that space can only be crossed through experience, not education. The hardest lessons in life aren't found in books or podcasts or even well-meaning advice from people who care about us. They're discovered in the quiet moments after we've made decisions we can't undo, when we're forced to confront the difference between what we thought we knew and what we actually understand. Jake learned that real wealth isn't built in dramatic moments of genius or luck. It's built in the accumulation of small, boring decisions that compound over years rather than weeks. It's built by people who understand that the most dangerous phrase in investing isn't "this might not work." It's "this can't fail." If you've ever felt tempted to risk everything on what seems like a sure thing, remember Jake's story. Remember that the market's greatest trick isn't taking your money when you're wrong. It's taking your money when you're so convinced you're right that you forget to protect yourself from being wrong. The best investors aren't the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones who make sure their mistakes don't destroy them.